Imagine spending nearly $20,000 in the space of just over a year on exams. That's exactly what I did while preparing for my pediatric specialty exams in Australia. Today I'm going to break down every dollar I spent, from courses to question banks to the exams themselves and slightly overpriced kitchen timers. Hi, my name's Freya and I'm a doctor living and working on Boonwurrung land in Melbourne, Australia. So before we dive into the costs, here's a really quick little breakdown about what exactly I mean when I say specialty exams. In Australia, after medical school and internship, most people will do a period of time, maybe doing some unaccredited resident jobs or registrar jobs, but eventually you will start a training program in your specialty of choice. And then at some point during that training program, you will sit your specialty exams. And this might be at one point, or if you're unlucky and you want to do something like anesthetics or ICU or pathology, it may be at multiple points throughout your training. So these exams are big, expensive hurdles to get through to the next stage of training. And I totally agree with why we have them. You want your doctor to be extremely well trained, but they are borderline prohibitively expensive. If you'd like more of an in-depth video about training pathways in Australia, then let me know in the comments and I can do that on another day. But for now, let's get into the costs. So the unavoidable ones are the costs of the exams themselves. So for pediatric training or any physician training, adult or pediatric, you sit the written exam and the clinical exam once you pass the written. The written exam costs just over $2,000 and then the clinical exam after that is just over $3,000. And when I say dollars, I mean Australian dollars, but I'll put the US dollar conversion on the screen to give you a frame of reference if you're not familiar with the currency here. And I should note as well with these exams that the questions for the written exam are written by volunteers and the examiners for the clinical exam are also there on a voluntary basis. Just some food for thought. Next up, a really big expense is the preparation courses you can do. And there were so many when I sat my exam. I'm sure there's many more now. And I paid for almost every single one available to me because I, like many people sitting these exams, was completely desperate and I just knew above all else if there was anything I could do to avoid having to sit these exams more than once, I would pay it at the detriment of whatever else. And I do think some of these were created from a space of passion for medical education and wanting to make this exam studying process a little bit easier, but I'm not entirely convinced that they were the motives behind all of the ones that were produced. Although I will say at least that the people making these exorbitantly priced online courses have a few more credentials than some of the other courses you see being sold online. So to break down exactly what courses I did and how much they cost, I did one on statistics, which was about $260, one on immunology, about $435, one on genetics, $345, nephrology, $118, an in-person neurology clinical skills tutorial that was run at my hospital, which was $35, a rheumatology course, which was $252, a 2-week intensive general course, $1,650, and then a weekly lecture series that ran for a few months, which was just over $2,000. So the total cost of courses was similar to that of sitting the actual exams, just over $5,000. Since I sat my exams, the Royal Australian College of Physicians actually have released a number of free lectures for their trainees, and from the ones I've seen, they're actually pretty good. I'm hoping that they will eventually negate some of the need or pressure or impetus to pay so much money to try and get the information needed to be able to pass these exams. So I also invested quite a bit of money in online resources, which were mostly question banks or short form educational videos or picture banks like of rashes and things like that. So to go through all of those, past tests, past medicine, a couple of UK based question banks, they were quite good to start with because the UK exams pretty widely recognised to be a little bit easier than the Australian exam. So it was a good one to start with, going through all of their questions. I used Picmonic and Visual DX. So altogether, I spent about about $850 on those resources. I then also paid for a pediatric BPT written exam specific question bank called LearnMed, which was $350 for the year. I also had an osmosis subscription for $378 to kind of revise some pathophysiology and things that I hadn't thought about in a few years. And then I also bought this kind of clinical exam pro forma PDF for $20. So the total for online resources was almost $1,600. And then to round it out, a few miscellaneous expenses, and I'm sure I've forgotten some things, but $178 on textbooks, $170 on stationery and physical flashcards and things like that, $51 on a kitchen timer, which I know is exorbitantly expensive, but I just really like this kitchen. Actually, I think I've got it. This kitchen timer. I spent over $50 on it. It's literally, that's all it does, but obsessed. I got a Zoom Pro subscription to do online study sessions for $230. My laptop broke, and so I bought a replacement. And because I am doing YouTube videos and podcasts and things like that, I did sort of get a nice laptop. So that was $3,270. I got a new stethoscope for the clinical exam because my cardiology fall had gone missing from the emergency department. So that was $330. And then I got a clinical exam kind of briefcase bag thing, which was $230. So total $4,460. And then finally, travel and accommodation costs. So the written exam was in Melbourne, which was fine. I could get there. But for the clinical exam, we actually have to go to a different city. And I guess the idea is reduced risk of you knowing the local examiners there and also the patients, particularly for some centres, because real patients are used in the exams and they're usually the patients with really complex medical conditions, and so they're pretty likely to be constantly in hospital, and if you work in that hospital you've probably met them, so I guess it's an unfair advantage. But as it stands, you find out 6 weeks before your exam where you need to fly to actually sit it. So for example, I live in Melbourne and my exam was in Perth, and for those who don't know, Perth is about a 4.5 hour flight from Melbourne. So 6 weeks out you have to buy flights for the weekend. You get kind of a day off before and after your exam, and you want to make sure that you ideally aren't getting a red-eye flight, or if say that one's cancelled, there's another one later in the day that you could theoretically try and get a ticket for. And then where you stay, you want it to be somewhere ideally that's probably going to be quite quiet so you can sleep and study and all of those things. So with all that said and done, I spent about $3,000 on flights and accommodation. So that's a total of $19,241. And I spent that in the space of maybe 15 months. And I have to say, I had no idea when I started the process quite how much it would cost me. And to be honest, I've probably forgotten a whole heap of things. So in reality, it was probably a lot more than that. Plus this was 3 years ago or something. So inflation, I'm sure all of those things are more expensive than they used to be. And our income hasn't gone up in that time. But I do think while some of the costs were unavoidable, paying for the exam and things like that, there were a lot of things that I paid for that I probably wouldn't get again if I had my time. So if you're interested in what was or wasn't worth it, let me know in the comments below and I can do a video on that too. And then hit subscribe so you don't miss the video when it comes out. Thanks for watching and good luck to all the junior doctors who are sitting their specialty exams soon. You've got this. I'll see you next time.